All right. Well, thanks for everybody for coming out tonight. Um, this is the second part of a multi-part presentation that we're going to be doing on Redux. Last month we did one with Adam Armour, our CTO, and he really covered it from a high level of what is Redux, why might you need it, why might you not. If you haven't seen that presentation, it is on our YouTube channel. You can find it through the meetup. If you look at the previous um, meetups, and you can find that information. A really good tutorial, high level about why or why not with with regards to using Redux. So, really quick about me. I'm the CEO of Briebug. I've been a developer for about 20 years. Mostly anymore, just focused on JavaScript-based solutions for about the last 7 years. Um, what we will Yes, we're recording. What we will cover tonight is a Redux tutorial and questions. So we're going to cover a little bit about how do I set this up and what are some of my options, and then we're going to really dig in and take a look at some code. Talk about how do I organize this because I'm adding what can be a significant amount of additional code to my application to support this. And so there's a couple different ways. Well, we're actually going to take a look at a couple different projects that are just different ways that you can approach it. So, so why Redux? That's the one thing we're not going to cover tonight. So as I was saying before, if you haven't seen that presentation, I strongly recommend that you take a look at it. Um, you know the main thing with Redux is you need to have an application that is complicated enough that warrants it. It does add a certain level of complexity to your app, and with that though, in hopes it will reduce the complexity of your app. It'll actually make things a lot simpler. Um, all right, so really the first thing and what we're going to look at here is a project. What I started out with was the Angular CLI. So very simply, all I did was just do a ng new and created a new project. Added Bootstrap to it so I can get a little bit of formatting, for layout, so it doesn't look totally horrible. And then a few minor things on configuring, and we'll take a look at that here. So. First thing we did, let's actually go look at the package JSON because there's a few things that you need to bring in. Most of this was all standard except for these four right here. We brought in NgRx Core, Effects, Store, and Store Dev Tools. Really the two that we're going to be looking at the most tonight is the Store and the Effects. Also, we added Bootstrap. I think that was pretty much it. So it's a pretty standard install, nothing really special. We did come over here. Has anyone started using the new release candidates for Angular CLI and upgrade their projects to it? Yeah, good. How's that been? Was that fun? Yeah, it's took me through four. Is not good, apparently. Nice. Nice. We just recently did one with a fairly large project going from beta 21 to RC2, and it took 3 days. It was quite the undertaking. So we added a couple pieces here under styles. So the Angular CLI JSON here, we added the styles so we get our Bootstrap. Really nothing too special there. So then really the next step is coming in onto the module here and starting to bring in a few of the components here. I don't know why that got moved down there. Let's move that back up. So I'm basically bringing in these three components. I'm bringing in the Store module, the Effects module, and then the Store DevTools module. We're really not going to cover this tonight. We're really going to be more focused here on the Store and the Effects. So the Store itself is the main component for NgRx. And with that, the first thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and provide the store. If I had multiple reducers, I would just list them in here. So if I had a cat reducer, and a dog reducer, I would just continue to add them as such. So, however, in our case here, we've only got one really simple customer reducer, and this basically initializes the store with that reducer. We go ahead and set up. We'll just do these in importance. We do the effects run, and we pass it the customer effects. So, and then the last thing that we do here is we go ahead and do the instrument only with extension for the dev tools. The dev tools are very handy. That could be a presentation just almost in itself on how to really best take advantage of those. So we really won't be getting too much into that tonight. So that's really the main part of the configuration here is just providing the store, and then if you are using effects to go ahead and set those up. If I have multiple effects, this one is different. I'd actually have to have one line for each one of them, like this. So, no, I don't need to keep duplicating, do I? All right, excuse me. So now going back over here. Really, the big discussion here is organizing our code, because as you can see, when we look over here, I've got customers' actions, effects, models, reducers, a service. It can actually become a little bit annoying in how much code. Is actually putting this demo together. I'm like, I'm not sure I would do it again this exact way, and so there's a couple different approaches for this. Has anyone gone out and taken a look at the example app with NgRx and kind of dug through that a little bit? So pretty good, really great example. A really good one to start to model your code off of. And it's just one approach. Their approach, although I don't agree with this approach as much, as it seems like we're starting to get away from this, where we're starting to create folders for actions, reducers, models, effects. It kind of gets us back to that whole paradigm of, I'll create one for controllers, and then I'll create one for views, and I'll create a folder for, where things aren't really living together. There's another example I was going to show you here. Here we go. So this here is a sample app for MapQuest, where Adam's currently doing some stuff, and his layout was a little bit different. In here, he actually created a state folder, and this is where most of his state stuff lives. So, state actions, effects, models, and reducers for search are all contained here. It's a little bit different approach. It really kind of depends on how big is your app, how complicated is it, and how much of it am I going to be using Redux with, right away. So that's the other thing that I do want to make clear, is that when you're deciding to implement this into your app, and let's say you've already got an app and you start to realize, well, I'm starting to run into some problems. This event's firing over here, which was firing this over here, and it starts to just become the spaghetti of event code happening. And so instead of saying, oh, well, let's just scrap this and I'll have to rewrite my whole app, you can actually bring in Redux and bring that pattern in and just do it on a specific area. You don't have to do it with the whole app. In fact, you can get it down to a single component if you want, and handle it like that. So it's not a either all or nothing. So as you're starting to make these decisions, one of the big ones that you really need to take a look at is, how do I want to organize this? Do I want to go with something like this, where then I've got my home component up here with a search component inside of it, and these are all pretty simple. I got my routing right inside of here. Here's the actual home page component where most of the content lives. And then here's the search component, and then it would be pulling from this state here and pulling those in. Or would you rather have things be more laid out by folders? So that's something you definitely want to consider when putting these together. So coming back, yeah, go ahead.
What would be a good advantage of having like the components approach as far as how you organize your code?
Basically, then everything lives together. If we look again over here, when we're developing, when we're creating new components, with especially like using the CLI, and I generate a new component, it's giving me the component, it's giving me the HTML, the CSS, and what's the spec file for it. I can then also create a module immediately for it as well. So everything lives together instead of taking the tests and putting that over in a test folder and that only lives over there. That seems to be more of a paradigm from Angular 1, where really at Angular 2 it's like, let's take things that belong together, let them live together instead of separating them. It And on the flip side, the other extreme is putting all of them in here, and now I've got a lot of stuff just under customers. I've got actions, effects, models, reducers. If I had to do it over again, probably what I would do is take all the ones that are for Redux and probably just put those in a folder underneath customers, and either call it state or something like that and place them there. It just starts to become a little bit overwhelming. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So now at this point we've got this application, and we want to display customers and be able to do a simple like add a customer and see how Redux works here. So what I did first is basically is something as simple as just saying ng component. Oh, yeah. Just like that, I believe, to go ahead and gen this component called customers, and that gave me this base shell here. Didn't do anything with the CSS, and the spec's still the same. Went ahead and created a module for it as well, so that we can pull in a few things. However, it's pretty arbitrary there. And then on the HTML, what I decided is basically we need a list and an edit form. Really nothing else for the simple example here. And now this is like the top level component. So in Redux world, this is the smart component. He actually knows what's going on a little bit, where the other ones are considered dumb components, and they don't know anything. They basically get handed an input and they deal with it. They don't actually know what's going on, why things are happening. We no longer have components talking to each other. They do all their communication through the store. So the first thing that we do with this is we go ahead and bring the store in. I'm bringing in the model, and the actions. So we'll take a quick look at this, and then we're going to take a step backwards again. So we can kind of break this down a little bit. The first thing we want to do here is go ahead and bring in the store. I go ahead and create a private variable here on the constructor. And then I set this customer is equals to this store select and tell it to go get customers. And that creates an observable for customers that now our local variable here now has that set. And he's going to be getting the updates. So in the case here, when we initialize this, one of the first things that we want to have happen is we want to go fetch customers. So instead, in the old days, man, we just go get the, this dot, customer service dot load, and then we go ahead and subscribe, right, and so on and so forth. We just go down that path. Well, in this case, we don't. The store is actually responsible for all the data. Now, there's nothing that's going to prevent you from doing this. However, if you do choose to go this route and start to abuse it, be prepared to have some really bad results. Things will be out of sync, things won't work, and you'll create a new mess. So in our case here, we want to, when we do want to communicate and say, hey, I want to go get customers, we go ahead and do that by using store dispatch. Okay, and then that's going to actually handle loading those customers. So when we're starting to create this, one of the first things we need to start to think about is, what are my actions? What does this thing need to do? And it gets a little more complicated than we go, okay, we got to load them, we got to save them. Let's see, we got to edit them, delete them. Okay, so what we start to do is define actions. So actions can be very simple like this. If we look at, we may actually flip over here in a second, and we'll take a look at some other actions and how those are defined. They can be more complicated. However, for this purpose of this demo, we want to keep it fairly simple. So here we've got just a static fetch customers equals fetch customers. So I'm just defining a list of customer actions, things that I'm going to want my application to handle. So, and not only do I have fetch customers, I also have fetch customer success and a failure. Save customer success, save customer failure. So these are all basically states of my application that I can get thrown into, or I can request. So we go ahead and define our actions here. And most times, we might start out with just say, hey, let's just start out with these couple, and I'll just start coding one or two at a time here and working with those and adding those to my app. As I then realize, oh, I've got to handle the success. When this comes back successful, I need it to handle a little differently. And especially on a failure, hey, I need it to do this instead. I might need to go load data or change the state of my application. So then we get into reducers. So has anyone worked with reducers outside of Redux? No? A little bit? Okay. So basically the idea on reducers is it's going to be a, help me out here.
Map reduce.
The what now?
Map reduce.
Map produce?
That's the sequence.
Oh yeah, map reduce, yeah. So basically we're going to create a reducer here, and all of these are going to return new state, okay? So what happens when the reducer gets called, he gets an object with two basic types, or two properties on this object. One is type, and the other one is payload. So in our case here, we're going to take a look at the type, and like the create customer one, we're going to go ahead and return our state. We'll use the ellipse, which does the spread on state that basically takes it out of its present form, which is an iterative, I'm going to say this wrong, enumerable object, or object that I can iterate over, and it takes that and breaks it back apart down into single components, and now we're putting them back into a array here. So notice though, we're not actually doing load customer here. However, this in most cases, the customer reducer should handle all of my customer actions. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and those actually get handled by effects, which we'll cover in a second. So what we do handle though is when the reducer, with the reducers, when the fetch customers is successful, then we go ahead and take that payload and we return it as a new object. Okay. Same on customer, like the success for the save. The delete one's pretty simple here. We're just going to return state filter, which is going to return a new object, where we're just looking for that one customer where that payload ID matches it. So fairly simple here, not overly complicated. Let's go back over here really quick. If we go look at, we were talking about actions, and they can be more complicated. Here, very similar, they're actually using this other thing called type, which handles the actions a little bit different, and I believe what it does, it also uses a cache on it to make sure that we don't ever have a duplicate action, as we don't really want that to happen. And then once we have those defined, then the other one here is we've got more complicated ones where I can say export class search action, implements action, and then the type on this is search, and then it uses a constructor. And in this case here, let me see if there was the one I was looking at before, like the complete action. So the payload here is going to be book. And so this now becomes the, it's just another way of defining an action, and makes it simpler so you don't actually have to coerce or work with the payload quite as much. So if you have more complicated ones, then this is definitely the way to go. Also on reducers, let's see here. These are all fairly standard, and then they have some other reducers here for different ways of getting the data back. So let's see here. All right, so far we've covered a little bit about actions, a little bit about reducers, and then the other component here is effects. So effects are when we want to go out and go load data. So when we need to use a service, when we need to handle loading data or saving data back to a data store, then effects are the preferred way of doing this. So to do this, I go ahead and create basically what's in effect a service, if you will. However, the difference here is adding the effect property on there, or the decorator onto this. So in this case here, we have a load method. It's going to return an observable action, and it gets registered that it's anytime that fetch customers gets dispatched, that it's going to go ahead and pick this up and run it. It's going to go ahead and use our customer service load method, and then what it does is very interesting here. Instead of just returning the data back, we're actually now taking the data that we get and we're mapping it into another payload or another dispatch. This here is where we're actually going to do our fetch customer success, and then our payload is our response that we get back. So depending on how the response is coming back, yours might look like response.data if it's actually coming from the database. In our case here, for our service, we just have a very simple observable of to go ahead and return this back to us. So nothing very complicated on our side. If we wanted to put, make it look more like what we'd have up on the server, we'd go ahead and do it like this so that we could handle it appropriately. So let's see here. We're in effects. And in the other case, if we do get an error and something goes wrong, then we're going to go ahead and return a new observable with the failure for fetch customers, and then sending the error down as the payload. This allows us then to put our app into a new state. This also becomes really handy when you start looking at the dev tools, because now you can start to see, and recreate the exact state of the application that a client had, and be able to walk through it and literally see, oh, this is how they got there, step by step by step. So
Is that time machine?
yeah, that's exactly, that's the time machine.
Using that sort of interrupt. I've listened to podcasts about this. Do you find yourself using it or not?
Yes, we use it. Yeah.
Okay, reasonably often.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful when things go wrong. It's a really helpful way. We're looking at how can we extend that further. Like when a client gets an error, how can we actually get that captured so that I can get it locally then and see and replay what they did. So without getting reams and reams of terabytes of data. So again, effects here, really nice way for handling these. The save is really basically the same way that this one is here. We're going to go ahead and call the save method on the service, and using the payload, and then when it comes back, we're going to go ahead and dispatch this new event here. So we come back over to our reducer. You can see we have a save customer success, which will then go ahead and take the existing state and change that back to single items, and then append that with the payload that's coming back. So let's see here. So now we talked about smart components and dumb components. So the first thing we want to do is go look at our list component. So if we look here, it's pretty simple. In our case here, we're just looping over the customer's object, and just displaying the customer ID and the customer name and an edit button and a delete button. So really pretty simple UI here. And when we get over on this side, it's even more simple. So all he knows about is the input that he's passed for customers. So the one big difference here, though, let me back up, is we need to add this here. Change detection. Instead of allowing Angular to do default change detection and allow it to look at every little change that's going on, we actually want to turn that off and have Angular respect that. And what happens is it'll only re-render based on this item here changing. When this changes, it'll re-render. Otherwise, we're telling it, no, we'll handle it. We'll let you know when it needs to change. This is the only thing you need to worry about. So we need to bring in the change detection strategy from Angular core and then go ahead and change that to on push. The other one is default. That's your other option there. So this is a dumb component. He really doesn't know much. He knows when you click the edit button that we just want to dispatch edit customer. He doesn't really know who's handling it, what's going on, where should I, nothing. Doesn't know anything about it. Same on the delete. When they click that, we're just going to dispatch the delete customer event and allow it the application to handle it. So over here on the customer edit, any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing other people are wondering this too. I think I've seen it with change detection strategy. I've played with it once. That is standard Angular, is that right?
Pardon me?
The change detection strategy enumeration. Is that standard Angular? I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, it's part of the core library for that change detection.
And how do you trigger the change? How do you trigger the push?
So what happens? So we'll actually come back to that in just a second. So what we actually have to do on this side is when we declare the customer list, we go ahead and pass customers to the list, and we do it with the async pipe. Okay, this here's the key. Without the async pipe, this doesn't work. It errors out. Things get really kind of harky and bad. So by using the async pipe, it lets it know, hey, this is an observable, and to watch for that change. So that's really what's going on there. So what happens is then when we, let's just kind of back up and take a look at on the reducer. Let's say we go ahead and call create customer, and we've passed it a payload with a customer on it. Then it should take the existing state, spread it, and then add this new customer to it and return a new object, right? And then what happens is, since we went ahead and assigned this dot customers equals this dot store select, this is the watcher. This is how he's going to get updated by this by the store select here every time this gets updated. And then so when that updates, then it goes ahead and that's what's getting passed into our customer list over here. So yeah. So then on the, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I did. Async was what I was missing.
Okay.
I tried very quickly once.
Gotcha. Okay, so the other one here is customer edit. Again, it's also a dumb component. It doesn't know anything about what's going on. It goes ahead and gets yeah. In this case here, he gets an instance of the store. And we do a dispatch when we click the save button to call save customer. And that goes ahead and fires off that event. So you can see everything now is starting to work completely separate from each other. I don't have to know about what you're doing. I don't have to know who's going to handle this. We don't have all these events firing off and then things haphazardly happening. A really good example is we'll see applications that one, a client changes or a user changes one setting, and all of a sudden we have 5 different pieces attempting to load, like new permissions, and or we've got everyone, all these different components are thinking they're responsible for going and getting the data when they really don't need to be. We allow the store to handle that, and then they can get updated with those permissions, that new data, whatnot, and not have to go out and go get it themselves. So, and I think that's pretty much most of what we wanted to cover. We can take a look at the app really quick here. All right. So I was just putting some breakpoints in and watching different stuff fire and whatnot. So when the app comes up, it's still seeing no customers, so I have a bug there. It's not picking that back up, and did not get a chance to get that figured out. So in this case here, I'm just clicking the add button, and we'll actually just put a simple ID test, and now I can call the save. Let me put some of the breakpoints back in so you guys can see what's happening here. All right, so, and then the reducer, actually in our case we want the effects. All right, so what happens now when I click this, you guys probably cannot see that. There we go. Back on the side. All right, can you guys read that? So in this case here, what we're doing is we've clicked the save button, and we're going to go ahead and use the store called dispatch on it, and have it dispatch the saved customer. We are passing it the customer, so pretty simple there. Need even more room here. So once that happens, what's happening here, the effect has went ahead and picked that up, and we can see on our, when we look at our action here, we've got our payload, which has a customer object on it. It's type save customer. We can see our object is there, and then it goes ahead, missed the other breakpoint there really quick. Sources, get it here, reducers. Oh, it won't let me have a breakpoint on line 20. Isn't that nice? So it won't let us stop there. However, basically, it's in taking that the existing state, which was an empty array, and then loading that or adding that to the payload and creating a new array and sending that out. So, yeah, unfortunately, since that's not firing, then the rest of that's not working.
Is the array initialized or is it undefined? In other words, that initial state, did you ever set that initial state initially?
Yeah, it should be, yeah, right there. So yeah, it's got one small error in it. So hopefully with this, you guys can kind of see the basics. I'll clean up the rest of the demo here and get this all firing tomorrow. However, that's our presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So I noticed in that one of the smart components, you called the load customers event, and that triggered the effect to pull in those from the API. So what if you had two different smart components, and they needed a list of customers, but they don't know who's on screen first,
Sure.
How would you?
Sure, that's a great question. So the question is what if I have two smart components and they're both attempting to load the same data? Well, the number one thing is don't do that. The smart components, and that easier said than done. However, actually, really comes down to smart components should be top level pages, and really their only function is to handle the events and get all the child components what they need. So in the case if you do have two smart components, you might want to take a look at the design and say, hey, how can I refactor this? These probably then aren't the smart components. I need to actually make a smart component that's at a higher level, and then both of those will get inputs fed to them.
So essentially, trickle down the information from top to bottom. Right?
Yes, the information trickles from top to bottom. So it's really that outer page. In fact, if we look at, I thought it was here. Yes, containers. So if we look here at what the NgRx does for their sample, is they're using containers here as their top level. These are the smart components. Everything else is dumbed down. They're dumb components. They just have inputs. We can see that when we come over here. Do they? Yeah. Okay. So actually, that one's on push too. Maybe it is on the components, and I've got it the other way around. Yeah, because these are the dumb components, and then these are the smart components. So we'll go to book search. Yeah, it does not have that the change detection strategy. So one of the other things you can do is you can also change the default. I believe you can go into the Angular CLI JSON, and I believe there's somewhere there you can set what the default is for change detection strategy. If you want to flip it so the default is on push. So, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you like this enough to use it in all your new projects here?
Yeah, we're actually taking I know with MapQuest, this came up for them, and where they just complicated eventing, a software product that's been around for several years, and it just grows and whatnot. So they're actually looking to start to refactor that. We're doing it with another project that very similar. It's a very dynamic application. What it does is when you go to the main entry form, it loads the metadata for what are the fields and what sections are they in and what are the rules, and we just started finding that the validation started becoming unreliable because of just this constant churn of figuring out, hey, should I show this? Am I to be shown? No, I'm not supposed to be shown. Am I valid? Am I not valid? And it's actually, yes, tomorrow morning I'm actually taking the what I was working on with that and merging it into develop and starting to get that pushed out. So yeah, especially with our bigger projects, it definitely makes a lot of sense. The smaller ones that aren't very complicated, there's really not a good reason then to bring this framework in, at least maybe not up front.
So I've been looking at the GitHub repo for this, for the NgRx, what is it, institution, or what is it called, at NgRx. And then the store is probably the most active one, and it looks fairly inactive. Is that maybe a word?
I know they released it, gosh, what was it, about 6 months ago? Does that sound right?
So
Maybe a little bit longer.
The history goes back to March 16. Sorry, about a year.
When they put it out, they actually said that they probably won't need to update it because it really doesn't do. It's pretty simple, and they felt like it was pretty much had the functionality.
I mean, you can see they updated the Angular version before that, something more RC.
That's probably the main thing is updating for Angular and Angular CLI and making sure those versions are up to date so that it installs well.
It's like if you look at the Redux project for React, it's actually not a big project either, and it doesn't change a whole lot. So it's kind of a utility that once they did it.
Once it's done.
Yeah, not a big reason to keep extending it or changing stuff unless it's broke.
And they kind of have an attitude of keeping it simple and focused. So you might not see big updates.
Thanks.
This
Yeah.
isn't actually Redux, though, right?
Pardon me?
This is a Redux style.
Yeah, there's two different libraries out there. One that's maintained by another group. I think it's Angular Redux. However, this is another Redux pattern. So Redux is just really not so much to me as a library. Yeah, it's a Flux pattern or simplified. The Redux. pattern. It's just a pattern. It's not really a library per se. It's just a way of approaching it, and this is just another implementation of that.
I'm just wondering, what about it separates it? I mean, obviously RX gives you a ton of power, but I mean, what's there?
Sure. I think the big selling point is that it's observables, and that's what we're working with anyway, all day long. So it's keeping us native to what we're already in, instead of having other constructs to deal with. So
And is that async pipe, is that one that comes in with this NgRx, or is that just
No.
Async.
no, that's part of core Angular stuff. So it's probably in the forms module, if I had to guess.
observable?
Yeah. Other questions? All right.